Are we recording?
We are recording, Mr. Sibley. Hello.
Hello, Andy. How are you?
I'm good. We've lost Joe.
Yeah, there's just a lonely microphone sitting over the other side of the table with nobody behind it.
Yeah, we were going to get my missus on, but she wasn't up for it.
So Joe's in Spain.
Yeah, never to be seen again.
Yeah.
Quarantine boy.
He's got quarantine the other side.
Oh, yeah, he will be, won't he? Unless they... I don't know if that's going to come off. I don't know.
It might
be interesting to see.
Try and bribe Boris. I don't know. But,
yeah. So we're without. But I think we've got an interesting guest on tonight.
Yes.
Mr. Jonny Hart from Classic Retrofit.
Or is it Classic Retrofit?
Yeah, I think it is Classic Retrofit. Yeah, it is. But yeah. So I'm looking forward to speaking to him. I bumped into him at Boxing Gaster at the weekend.
How was that?
That was really good. Yeah, it was good. Such a big turnout. There must have been a good 400 air-cooled cars, and then probably another 150 or so water-cooled cars.
Really? Yeah.
I mean, everybody was just gagging to get out.
It
was so opportune.
It's been the only event of the year, isn't it?
Yeah,
like really properly
yeah.
structured like that. Yeah. Simply Porsche's September
27th.
So
I think they've just put out some more tickets. Actually,
I have seen that. Yeah.
But yeah, it was good. It was good just to get out and talk to people. Saw so many people that you hadn't seen all year, so it was good just to gas about.
Try and get 2020 back on the road, isn't
Absolutely,
it?
Yeah. And I flung around some of our little business cards. So sorry if you got back to your car on Sunday and found a business card under your windscreen wiper that you then threw away. But yeah, it was a good little event. Took Mrs. B.
Excellent.
She enjoyed it as well.
Excellent.
Yeah, there's a few people that we know up there, so it was good.
I've seen some interesting pictures on Instagram of your car on different wheels. Mate, I think that looks awesome.
Do you like them? Yeah.
Really do. Slightly bigger, aren't they? 18s now?
They're 18s, yeah. So Cup 2 replicas.
Yeah.
Borrowed off of Matt Glossop. Just a short-term loan. Trying it really just to try out, make sure that I like 18-inch wheels on the car. Okay. So from a ride point of view rather than anything. Tyres are a little bit stretchy. Because he's running those on his 964, so and you know how low he runs his car, so they're quite stretched.
Yeah.
But it rides pretty well. So yeah, 18s are on their way.
They are. Are they ordered already?
I've put a deposit down on some.
Awesome.
I'll let it out the bag in a little while once I've actually got them. But I've got to make a big trip to go and pick them up north somewhere.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, must line that up. And
sounds good. Yeah, we'll look forward to seeing what you've gone for and how the new car looks. Is it going to be a bit of a subtle new look going on with the 993 then, or is it wheels only?
Yeah, there might be some different stuff coming on. Yeah.
Nice.
Got to change it up now and again, haven't you?
Yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah.
We digress anyway. Shall we get on Jonny from Classic Retrofit?
Yeah, let's do that.
Awesome, let's do it.
Hello?
Can you hear us?
Hello.
Yes, ideal.
Yeah.
Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, live and direct. Yeah.
Awesome.
Live and direct.
Yeah, good. You look like you're in the epicenter.
Yeah, this is the bunker where we do all the work for the Taliban and stuff. So yeah.
He's a dodgy character, I reckon.
Yeah, absolutely love it. We won't tell Trump where you are.
Right, Jonny. Thank you very much for joining us.
No.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Yeah, a little bit busy after the mad summer, but yeah, very well.
You got lots going on at the moment, then?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's been our busiest year. You know, we're in our 5th year, and this summer has been kind of strange. Well, it's been very strange for a lot of people,
hasn't it? All. Yeah.
But for us, I guess we were kind of caught by surprise a little bit. Looking back on it, I think it is no surprise that people wanted to do projects when they were stuck at home.
Yeah.
But that's meant that really we've had the busiest 3 months ever in the history of what we've done in the short 5 years that we've been around. So approaching 200 AC kits shipped this year, which is really quite crazy considering we thought we might sell 20 a year at one point in time.
Yeah.
So so
nuts.
It has been quite tiring at times. I took 2 weeks off actually a couple of weeks ago, and despite setting up your email responders and trying to sort of avoid contact with humans, still kind of managed to just get a whole pile of orders in, and and obviously I don't want to sound
and then you got to catch up.
I got to catch up. I don't want to sound ungrateful for a minute, but I say it has been quite surprising what's happened the last 3 months.
Well, I'm in a similar sort of business, bike electronics, and that's just been crazy. I've not really had a day off over the whole time. It's just been the retail orders have gone crazy. I think people are wanting to buy stuff and fit stuff and keep themselves occupied. So I think we're in the same sort of businesses.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's but the funny thing is, it's like all of the guys that I try to keep as much of the work local as possible. So I'm based in Sussex, so most of the things that we make are made within 10 miles of here, and I go around these companies all the time, and they're all saying the same thing, that they're totally maxed out, and it's just amazing. So good.
Yeah, it's good, isn't it?
Yeah, very good.
Can we go back to sort of how you started? And I believe I had a little read up on your website, and I believe it was the purchase of an 82 SC that sort of started you on this trail of
trail of destruction.
Invention.
So I wasn't, so going back a bit sort of further back, I mean, I haven't been a sort of Porsche guy through and through, and I didn't start with Beetles, and I didn't do all that, but I did. I definitely you're talking with Magnus last week about the poster on the wall, and I definitely had I think I had a 959 on my wall when I was a kid. But my first sort of thoughts about getting a 911 were about sort of 2007, 2008. And there's one particular article, I think it was 911 Porsche World, where some guys who they became sort of the DDK kind of guys. But there was like a collection of early cars. I remember there was a silver one and a gold. And I just thought, you know what, that is just so nice, these cars, and the way that the photography was done in the sort of, it was like some sort of something like a drained swimming pool. It's really odd, and all the cars were on ramps, and it just I've still got that issue. I still go back to that, and that's when I started looking around, and it took me sort of a year of sort of research and finding forums and that kind of stuff, and then and then I happened to stumble across an advert on eBay. I remember this is about 2010, so it was kind of before everyone had smartphones. So it was a single photograph taken in the rain, probably with like a Nokia 610 or something, or whatever they were. The first ever sort of color thing where you could sort of vaguely take a picture, and just a single picture of a car in a driveway somewhere in near Dagenham, and so weirdly I was looking at this car, and it was on a buy it now for 6,995.
Oh my god.
And nobody bid on it at all, and it ran out. And
crazy now.
It just seems ridiculous now. So and then I sort of realised, I tried to contact the guy, and I realised why no one had bid on it. And basically it's because the guy who was selling it kept very strange hours. He worked night shifts. He just did odd, 4 days on, 4 days off. So actually going to see this car and meeting with the bloke was like planning a trip to the moon or something. It was just ridiculous. And, eventually I managed to see the car, and, I knew about the sort of kidney bowls and all this sort of stuff that I'd read about. And I still bought the one with the kidney bolts that were rusty, obviously. But I thought, do you know what? It was getting to the point. It felt like there was a pressure. It's like, if I don't do something now, I'm never going to get one of these things.
Yeah.
And so I gave him the asking price because, I thought, well, it's not a bad price really.
Yeah.
And for that money, I thought, well, do you know what? It doesn't really matter if it needs some work, but. Yeah, so it turned out to actually be, a really sound buy because the rust was very localized on it, and it literally needed half a seal on one side and both the kidney bolts replaced, and the rest of it was just solid really. And and then obviously, as we all do, slippery slope. But I think I drove it around for 2 years. How it was. 118,000 miles.
Can you remind me what colour it is?
It was
pretty epic.
Well,
isn't
it was a different colour. It was platinum metallic, which is kind of I call it metallic puddle because it looks like the colour of puddle in the UK, but metallic. It might look great in California under that sunlight, but something in the UK is just really depressing about it. It's sort of metallic mud. It wasn't like a cool that bronze turbo that Magnus has got. That's a really cool colour, isn't it? Because it sort of like fizzes like Coca-Cola and looks really dynamic. But this is just like. So I thought, well, that's going to change, and obviously, loads of people. It was a bit before the time when people were sort of that fussed about colour changes.
Yeah.
So drove it for 2 years, and then it started to get really quite bubbly around the edges. So I just took it off the road, and within 2 weeks, I'd had the engine out and all the paint off of it. And I thought, well, that's it. That's the start of the slippery slope, isn't it? And then it went to Barry Carter, who's a bit of a DDK legend in the sort of bodywork restoration.
Yeah.
Who happens to live, 10 miles away from me. So, and he, because he's used to the earlier cars, he actually was quite amazed at how little he had to do on it. And then it was painted, and then of course the next thing is you start putting the thing back together, and you sort of every part, if anyone who's built a car does this, they sort of they've got the car there and they've got the bits, and they take a piece out, don't they, and they go, is that good enough to put back onto my car? And and we all make that decision, don't we? And of course, for me, the first thing that I stumbled across was the CDI unit, and I'm like, well, hang on a minute, what's that about? What does that do? Is it good enough to put back on the car? And of course, it's got 4 screws on the back, so obviously I had to take those off. Found basically a circuit from the 60s in there, and thought, do you know what, that doesn't look to me like something that's worthy on going on a car that I've literally done everything to. And then I started to ask around and see, well, what's the solution? And there really isn't a solution apart from fitting these rather nasty MSD boxes, which are these big sort of American kind of in your face, kind of lightning bolts and power. And I thought that's just not what you put in a Porsche. It has to look right. So I started looking at that, and remember, Classic Retrofit hadn't been born at this time. This was way before then, and I was working, in the electronics business, and so it was like a side project, really, as a hobby, just to, develop some new electronics for these ignition boxes. And then I thought, it's got to the point now of I've spent quite a lot of time on this, and is it something that I could offer as a product? But in all honesty, I decided it was too complicated to sort of, if you're starting a company, if you start with like a really complex product, then it could almost be the kiss of death, because it's like, well, if people don't understand it, it's a fully mappable ignition box. It's not just a spark box. So it has software that you can plug in and you can play with it and you can tune it and all that stuff. I thought, you know what, it's too complicated. So that's when I've discovered that there was this problem with all the fuses on the cars as well, and that they melt and all that stuff. So so then obviously I've been on these forums, and do you know the forum impactbumpers.com? That's the Impact Bumper forum, and found people moaning about the fuses, and I said, well, look, shall I make a replacement for this for these fuses? And did a great thing about forums. You can do those polls, can't you, where you sort of say, well, how many people would like to see this? And so I got 60 responses. I thought, that's actually quite good. So then I basically said, well, look, I can fund this if it's basically like almost like early crowdfunding. So I said to people, look, how much are you prepared to pay? And I've got a survey of sort of the price point, if you like. And I basically reached out to a few people and said, look, it's going to take me a while, but if you sort of can give me not I didn't want any money, but I just said, if you can give me a sort of gentleman's kind of, I'll have one of those off of you. Yeah. Then, I can get going on it. And I was surprised. I got sort of 40 or 50 people who said, definitely have one. And they all pretty much came good, actually. So, it allowed me to design that. And that was the first thing where I thought, well, that's simple enough for people to understand. It's a fuse panel. Yeah. It's got headlamp relays on it, which is what the cars don't have. And, I've got a captive audience of people who are basically beta testers, who are all really good guys, because Impact Bumpers is weird. There aren't any horrible people on it. It's not like some of these other rotten, what car forums are like,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
But for some reason, going back to that thing about Porsche people and about how, they're, the people's idea of them versus what they're really like, I find generally they're really nice people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. So that was basically the motivation. And that's when, I suppose, the spark of Classic Retrofit was born, was the fact that, I'd managed to do this beta testing. I'd got 50 or so of these things in cars, and people had been whizzing around with them for like 6 months, and I had two and couldn't find anything wrong. So I thought, well, that's obviously enough people to know that the product's good. And the thing you buy today is still based on that original design. I think there's been one subtle change, but it doesn't affect the function of it. And here we are, probably sold, getting on for a couple of thousand of those now. So sort of 5 years later. So yes,
excellent. So that was the first real sort of product then.
You'd probably say that's the thing. So
so they're pretty cool because they've got LEDs, haven't they? When the fuse goes, the LED lights up.
Yeah, well, it's actually like so I used to work in the flight simulation industry, and we used to basically build simulated equipment that simulates stuff in the aircraft. So, when you get a flight simulator, you're trying to mimic an aircraft. And then we sort of had different products. And my boss at that company always said that, if you've got a product, there has to be something on it that's like the magic bit that tips people over the edge to make them sort of think, actually, that's more. So the LEDs are that part of it. It's like, yes, it's a fuse panel with the blade fuses, but the fact that you can use these LEDs you can use them basically to diagnose the wiring in the car, because it's one of the things people don't realize because they don't read instructions. But if they read my instructions, if you were wiring a car from scratch and you put that panel in and you took all the fuses out, every time you operate one of the switches, you'll find that an LED goes on. So, for example, if you switch the lights on, those two will go on. Yeah. But if you'd miswired the car, the wrong LED would go on, so you'd know you'd miswired it. Yeah. So effectively, that's sort of that's the magic part of this, and then the relays as well. They add to it because there aren't any 911s up to 89 that have relays on the headlamps.
Yeah.
So it's just terrible. I mean, we actually had a German, very, very German of the guy, but we actually had a German guy install one of these, and he was a lighting technician, and he took his car into work and had it put it on a calibrated light meter and measured a 20% improvement running that versus the original lights. So so good on Wolfgang, I think his name was. He's so
classic.
Yeah,
very German,
very Teutonic.
Yeah, so we had that, and then we had the little fuse panel, which is obviously the one in the back, and then also the one for the earlier cars. So they're all variations on the same design. And then obviously I then went back to the CDI, and I'm like, is it time now? Can I put that out?
Got a bit of sort of history, company history.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we'd only be going probably, a year at the time. But I was really nervous because I've seen how people can sort of, fall on their swords on forums, and I mean, Pelican Parts is like the biggest Porsche forum, in the world pretty much, and oh my God, some of the yarns on there, you just kind of, you think I'm not going anywhere near that. So I thought, well, how can I kind of get this thing out there when people don't know about it? And, how can I give them confidence that it's a real thing and not just like the latest wonder box, if you like. And that's when I got a lucky break, because I had one of Neil Bainbridge's customers contact me, a guy called Mike, and he said, "Oh, you should give Neil a call because he's got this dyno up in at BS Motorsport, and it's a proper. I don't know if have you been up to? Do you know BS Motorsport in Westcott? No. So Neil basically builds a whole bunch of. I mean, he's built so many engines. It's incredible because because he's only got one arm. That's part of the incredible thing about him. But he's an amazing engineer, and he's got the full one of the World Rally Championship. Not just the dyno, but he's got the full engine test cell. So most people just have a dyno, don't they? But he's got the full room. He bought it off Hyundai, I think, or something like that. But so he's got all the methods of properly testing stuff, and he ran one of the first tests on this box against a standard Bosch unit. So we actually could do back-to-back dyno testing for power and tinker with the settings, and that's the start of quite a long relationship now. Where he's supported us, and having his name associated in the early days with him saying, "Well, look, I've tested these boxes. They do make more power, and here's a dyno chart and all the rest of it."
So a good backup to the science.
Yeah, unequivocal then, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So it come from a point of view of like objective testing, but it still continues to this day, because as a sort of if you've ever met any engineers, you know that they just never give up trying to make things better. And we're now on the sort of like fourth or fifth revision of that board, and it's not saying there's anything wrong with the early ones, but we're always striving to just make them a little bit better than one before. So so then we had this.
Sometimes it's actually knowing when to stop, isn't it?
Oh God, yeah.
Because you can chase the perfect thing forever and ever.
I'm terrible. I don't even. We'll do this when you come down, but I don't even show you in the other room, because it's like the road to successful projects is littered with abandoned ones. That's basically that's kind of just how it is. And for every one that's success, there's 4 or 5 that are just kind of like, oh crap, that didn't work. So
those were your sort of foundation then, the two, the fuse box and the CDI.
Exactly.
But you're mostly known for your electrical air conditioning systems, so really. That's where it's.
Yeah, I mean, this is just a completely. I mean, looking back on it, I mean, it started at probably about three or 4 years ago when I must admit, a lot of this stuff as well comes from, my missus, because it's like, it's like you buy a car and you restore it and you spend all that money on it. And then the first time you take her out, she's like, "Has got air conditioning, hasn't it?" I'm like, "No." What you've spent all that money on a car that doesn't have air. What are you like? So and
I love that. Blame it on the missus.
Well, it's kind of like they're kind of quite a good barometer, aren't they, of whether whether you're going in the right direction on a lot of different subjects. But anyway, so the idea of the air conditioning was, well, I realised it was crazy to think about, putting the Porsche stuff back on there because it's horrifically expensive. You can't get half the bits. Also, with a right-hand drive car, very few, mostly it was only turbos that had aircon in the UK. Yeah. When you going back to the old, hardly any of the early cars in Europe had air conditioning. Yeah. When you got into the impact bumper ones, it was probably quite a high cost option. I occasionally see a 3.2 Carrera with air conditioning, but I've personally never seen a UK SC, for example, with air conditioning. Never seen it. And it's a different proposition because, the smuggler's box, which is under the hood. Yeah. In a US car, that's really big, and that's where they put all the gubbins for the AC. Yeah. But the UK car has just a tiny little inspection hatch. There's no room. So it's like, well, do you know where they put the aircon in a right-hand drive? Do you guys know? No. It goes behind the passenger footboard. So the passenger actually sits with his knees up like that because there's no room for his feet. Yeah. So it's ridiculous. Next time you see a turbo, look in the passenger footwell, you'll go, where are you meant to put your feet? Because it's stuck down there. So it's like, well, what am I going to do here? And I have a sort of habit of stumbling across stuff that's kind of new to market. I don't know. I've always had a bit of a nose for stuff that's just emerging, and I managed to find this pump, 12-volt pump, AC pump, and I kind of thought, well, I'd maybe have a go at getting. Building an aircon. I didn't know anything about aircon. I really didn't. I was starting right from scratch. So, read a few things on the internet, started looking at the way electric cars do AC and that kind of thing, and I literally had a plywood board with a pump and a condenser and all the gubbins that you need and all the hoses. And I drove up in my van to a local AC shop, and I said, "Can you guess my AC?" And they're like, "Oh, pop the lid, mate." And I said, "No, it's in the back of the van.
It's in the boot."
And then I pulled out this piece of plywood, and they were just scratching their heads. And I said, "Look, just put
who's this nutter that's just turned up?
Just put some gas in it, and just send me away with a flea in my ear. I don't care. I'll just
amuse me.
Yeah, I'll just go away." So that's what I did, and then I had a sort of, playing around with that, and I got some cooling out of it, and then I sort of fiddled around a bit, and I got it to a stage where, it was producing cold air, and I thought, well, this is a thing. But remember, it's still on a bit of plywood in my garage. Yeah, and then what happened next is rather odd. So again, due to the impact bumper forum, I thought I'd put a little thread on there saying, it's still there to this day. You can go and Google it. It says, electric air conditioning, will it ever work? That's the title of the thread. That it's still there. You can go and see it. And basically, it was me cocking around with bits and pieces on a bit of plywood. And this went on for several pages. And then I think I kind of got distracted, and I left it for a couple of months. And then out of the blue, I just got a phone call. And it was one of the guys on the forum, and he said, "Oh, I'm a contractor, but I work for Williams, and how's that AC of yours going? And I said, well, it's going. He said, great. Can you drive the car up and show us? And I'm like, no, it's going, but it's on a bit of plywood in the workshop. And I think it was a Tuesday. It was a Tuesday, and he said, well, can you get it in the car for next Thursday and get it up to Grove? And he said, I can't tell you what it's for, but it's going to be worth your while if you could do it. So, well, like a challenge. So yeah, literally, I just sort of did whatever I could to get that system shoehorned into the car. It was a right proper lash up, but it did work. But I had to do things like I had to cut a piece of black card to cover up the sort of snake's wedding of wiring that I put in the car. Because I thought if anyone sees that, they're just going to be like, "What's this guy?" So it was all a bit like when they sort of do the sort of test mule cars, and they sort of put bits of black tape on and all that sort of stuff. So when you opened the lid, you saw the carpet and there was bits, you're not allowed to look in there, kind of thing. So I mean, talk about crazy. I remember I drove to the same AC place that did the gassing the first time, but this time it was in the car, and I drove up there on the Thursday morning. It's in Edenbridge, that's sort of about 20 minutes from me. Got it gassed and drove to Williams, and on the way on the way to Williams was the first time that I'd ever tested it in a car.
Jesus.
Right, so
I'm guessing where this is going.
Yeah, so I get to Williams, and I wish they had beards, but it was as if a load of guys with long... You've just got to imagine they've all got beards. So all these engineers came out of Williams with long beards that they didn't really have, and sort of stroked them and looked on, and I switched it on, and the cold air came out, and they were all sort of, all the stuff. And of course, I didn't know what was going on. I was just well, okay, so now what?
What am I here for? And
there's the guy looking at his watch, and then suddenly this I think it was a cab came in, and this guy got out, and my first impression of him was that he looked like he was a little bit from the Mafia. He was quite. He sort of had quite sort of slick back, sort of dark hair and glasses, and he had a sort of long sort of trench coat on. And I thought, who's this guy here? And I was expecting him to sort of greet me in a sort of Italian sort of twang, and he went, "All right, mate." I'm like, "What?" I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm Scott. I'm the UK representative for Singer." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And apologies, Scott, if you're listening to this, because this is that was my first impression of you, and it was just not what I was expecting. So, but no, Scott's become a very good mate of mine now, and and I took him for a ride, and basically the sort of I wouldn't say the deal was done, but that was the first kind of start of it. The start of the Singer DLS and the electric aircon that we designed for that, and and of course that program is still ongoing, but they're getting into production now. So the first cars are starting to come out. So that's basically how all of that happened, and then. So that was amazing. And I suppose that gave me the sort of boost to think, it was actually a conversation with one of the other guys at Sing, a guy called Chris, who's from California, and he'd come over to ride in the car and check out the AC. And, when we were out and about, I said, well, do you think this would work for do you think people would buy this? And he said, he said, if this was available on the market, you'll sell 200 a year. And I was like, are you sure? He's like, no. He says, seriously, you've got to get over to California, because there's just, half the Porsches ever made are in California, half the air-cooled Porsches.
Yeah,
so
they're all sweating their asses
off.
Exactly.
So, so March 2017, I went over to the LA Lit Show. Have you been out there?
Yeah.
That's amazing. It's just kind of, big hotel with all the stands. But also there's all these shops that are open. You can do all these tours and go around and speak to people. So I took effectively what was the prototype. So I'd done a bit more design work, and I took that out to the LA Lit Show and showed it as a prototype.
Not still on a piece of plywood.
No. We'd moved on a little. I think we were on a sort of we had a table. I had a stretched lycra tablecloth, so that's what it was on. Yeah, So and I got a lot of interest, and funnily enough, to this very day, I still get people calling up and saying, I met you at the LA Lit Show. And I was like, that was like in March 2017. That's like over 3 years ago. So I remember. So that's bizarre. But that whole thing, that whole trip was completely amazing for a load of reasons. And one of them, I pretty much I was sort of I went with some mates, but I left them up in, because they hadn't done the coast drive, the San Francisco down
the Big Sur. And
yeah,
all that sort of
but one thing I haven't touched. I grew up in California, so I kind of know.
Oh, okay.
I was a Silicon Valley kid back in the 80s,
and
that's where my sort of computing and electronics comes from a little bit. So I'd done the whole kind of California thing, so when we flew into San Francisco, I basically went to see some old mates, and those guys went and did the big touristy things, and I then sort of flew down to LA. So I was on my own when I came into LA, and I don't know LA that well, but I'd shipped, because we were selling fuse panels to Pelican Parts. I'd shipped the AC kit to Pelican, and the deal was I'd just pick it up from them, and I met this guy, Scott, who sort of looks after, our business out there. And I think they said, well, let's show us what you got. And we got it out. And then the first thing that happened was like, we're doing an open day tomorrow. This is before the LA Lit Show. It's like 2 days before.
Yeah.
We're doing an open day tomorrow. Why don't you just have a stand at the open day? Because your kit's already here. Just rock up in the morning and show it here. And I was like, okay. I mean, this is a story of how welcoming and lovely the Americans can be. I mean, they are very much face-to-face people, and so this went from me. So I did this thing at the Pelican open day, and then towards the end of the day, this guy Scott came back up and he said, "Do you know what? I've got a ticket. My mate's just cancelled. I've got a ticket to dinner tonight. Do you want to come to dinner?" I was like, "What are you asking me to dinner? What are you asking me to dinner for?" He said,
"Took a fancy to you."
Yeah, and he said, "Well, it's the opening of the new Porsche Centre in LA, the one they built on the golf course, what used to be the golf course."
Yeah.
So, well, it wasn't just going for a beer. It was like at the 917 restaurant that they opened overlooking the racetrack with the R group a lot. So I went to I didn't know, I was just this guy, limey bloke from England, sat amongst all these R gripper guys. And to be honest, it's embarrassing because they didn't actually know at the time who they were, but they're all like the legendary kind of old school racer blokes who just kind of started the whole, hot rod scene in California. And there's just me just kind of having a few drinks with them and a really nice meal.
Oblivious
watching these cars whiz around the track and all this stuff. And and then we ended up in the hotel bar till very early on in the morning. Because we'd gone back to the hotel where the LA Lit Show was, and then I did a whole day of the LA Lit Show, which you have to be there at 5:30, and I think I've gone to bed at about 2:30. So, plus you've got to get all your gear up this tiny little elevator. It's hilarious, and there's all the people trying to go up and down, and you're there with like boxes. Anyway, so I was absolutely wiped out, and then towards the end of that day, somehow I met Dorian from DV Mechanics, and he said, "Oh, what you doing?"
Big alpha guy.
Yeah, the alpha guy. Yeah, and he's like, "Oh, what you doing tomorrow?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't know yet." He's like, "Well, why don't you come round and check out my workshop and stuff?" So I went round to his, and and of course, when I was there, I was expecting to see a load of Alphas, but what he had also there was a load of really cool 911s. And I was like, isn't that the Luftgekühlt Safari? Do you remember the first Luftgekühlt Safari? It was a white one. It was the very first one. That was in his garage. And it was well before anyone had done it. And I'm like, what's that? That's really cool. He's like, oh, that belongs to some movie star guy. I can't remember his name. And I was like, oh, you got 72 and you got this and you got that. He said, oh, that's Magnus's. I was like, oh, you know Magnus? He said, yeah. Do you want to go around Magnus's? I was like, okay. So literally, I'd sort of like, to me, I'd just get off the plane and I'd just done this mad back-to-back Porsche kind of intense,
crazy shit.
Yeah, concentrated Porsche activity. And then I ended up going around to Magnus's and having a chat with him. And and to be honest, that whole kind of thing was just ridiculous, you know. And
I think that exemplifies, doesn't it, just how like awesome, particularly in Porsche circles, the Americans are. Just, you know, get involved, everybody mix in, do stuff, and I think they do it right over there.
Yeah, and the introductions I've still got a box. I must have 300 business cards in this box. And I go back and I look through it and I'm like, oh my God, I met this guy.
I didn't even know who he was at the time.
Really cool people. I remember, and since then I've just seemed to have, by getting involved and by actually sort of putting your face, so this is sort of a thing now. It's like, if I want to actually do some business or talk some projects, I'll always go and see people because, you can pick up the phone, but if you can actually go and see them, then, I think that really changes the whole dynamic. Which brings me on very neatly to the next thing that happened after I got back. So next thing happened after I got back, I was sitting at my desk and the phone rang and it was Alois Ruf's PA saying, oh, I've got Alois Ruf on the phone for you. I was like, okay. Right, okay. So this is a wind up then, isn't it? So and there he was on the end of the phone, and I thought, no, it's not a wind up, it is him. And he's like, oh, I've read about your I've read about your electric air conditioning, and will it work in a water cooled car, and asking me all these sort of vaguely technical questions. And I said, well, what car is it? Oh, well, it's something we're working on. Like, so is it a 911? Kind of, and kind of a bit evasive, but also trying to sort of have a technical conversation. And he said, well, the next time I'm in the UK, I'll come and see you. And I was like, okay, all right, fine. Weird, but anyway. But I've subsequently find out he does this quite a lot. He's a bit of an angler. He loves the sort of English thing. He loves his Jags and stuff, and he has popped up. He has actually sort of appeared at people's houses and bought a Jag off them, in person, which is it's just a little bit unbelievable. But anyway, I was sitting here again in a few weeks after that, and the concierge of some hotel in London phoned me and said that, Mr. Ruf are you available in a couple of hours? Mr. Ruf would like to come and see you. And I was like, okay, that's fine. And I suppose I half expected him to ring and me to give him directions to get the train. But no, what happened was the limo drove all the way down from Hyde Park or wherever it was.
That is excellent.
All the way to my house. So I'm in Sussex, so it's like a sort of 2-hour drive out of central London.
Yeah.
And I was just concerned that the chauffeur hadn't had a pee, because he was stuck out in the limo, like out the front of my house for like 2 hours. And I kept,
he'd had a piss in your bushes.
Yeah. I'll get on to Alois, but this is how my brain works. I'm talking to Alice, and I'm sort of saying, is that driver all right? He hasn't had a piss for like 3 hours. What's going on? And but they must be well trained, or they've got some device hidden in the limo. I'm sure of it. But yeah, I mean, again, totally. Obviously the guy's in my workshop, and he just wants to talk about the car, and he was talking about my SC, which is in the garage, and I'm just. Pointing out all the bits, pointing out to me all the bits that I'd done on it, which was quite interesting. Yeah. He obviously knows the cars inside out. He's like, "Oh, you rolled the arches."
It was his first dabble, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
With,
so
Evans was the SC.
Yeah. So again, and then the next thing is like, "Oh, you have to come down to Pfaffenhausen and meet the guys and see if we can work together on the project." So what happened next was. We got an invite to go down, and I thought, do you know what? I'm going to drive. I'm not going to get, he was telling me about the plane. I'm going to do what he did to me. I'm just going to turn up in my car. So
brilliant.
Yeah. So I went with, John Glynn, who runs, he's writes, for some of the magazines, and he runs the Impact Bumper website. So, he decided, we both decided to just go down there, and so we drove the SC down there. I think we did first. We did Stuttgart in one leg, which is not bad going, really, is it? From Sussex, so it's about
absolutely
700 miles, is it? Something like that. It's quite a way. Yeah, so he tanked it down there, spent the night in a hotel. Somewhere in Bavaria, and then turned up at Ruf the next morning. How long have we got? Because I've got another sort of what I think is quite a funny story to associate with turning up.
Just go for it.
So this is I don't know whether I should mention any names, but there's a certain YouTuber guy who's a little bit posh. Reviews a lot of supercars and seems to be obsessed with whether they've got carbon fibre on the dashboard. Is that ringing any bells to you?
Yeah, I think so.
I drive up to Ruf, and it's early in the morning. It's about 8:30 in the morning, and on the forecourt, Ruf's on the roundabout, and they've got like the forecourt. Yeah. You always see it in the pictures. They've got the new CTR and the old Yellowbird side by side. And I said to John, so where do we park? He said, just park it on the forecourt. I was like, I can't do that. He said, just park it on the forecourt. So I just put it on the forecourt. And this chap, this chap who's Mr. the one, he comes out and he said, you can't put that there. And I said, what do you mean I can't? I said, well, look, I've just arrived. I've had because I've driven 2 hours that morning. It's like, I've just arrived. I'm just going to go and see what the lie of the land is because, I've got an appointment with guys, engineering appointment. He's like, well, you can't put it that. You have to put it out of the way. And I was like, okay, well, I'll move the car then. I'll move it out of the way. So I moved it out of the way and I moved it to the side. And this guy, I didn't know who he was. He's having photos taken with the cars and all this stuff. And went in to receptioners, and it's nice when you go there. They put out a little plaque and it says, "Welcome, Jonny Hart." It's like really nice, I was like, oh, I feel special. So said, oh, I'm here, and I got a coffee and a pretzel, and and then Alois and Marcel came out and said hello, and and then they're like, oh, well, have your coffee. Give me 10 minutes, and Alois went off into his office and came back 10 minutes, and he said, right, I'll get the team together. And we went straight in to a technical meeting, and we're in there. Remember, we'd arrived at 8:30, and we were in there until 12:30. So we've been in that technical meeting for 4 hours, at which point there's a knock on the door, and Estonia puts her head round the door and says to Alois, aren't you meant to be having an interview out the front? And he went, oh yeah, that guy. And I was sort of like, oh no, have we sort of like is he double crashed it? Yeah, we crashed the party. And I said, look, if you've got to go, it's absolutely fine. Honestly, we'll go and get some lunch. He said, no. He said, I take you to lunch. I said, are you sure? It's like the guy, I take you to lunch, he said. And we walked. So remember, I'm just the scuzzy guy who arrives in a ratty old SC from England and walks in and somehow disappears into Ruf. When I walked out, I was walking with Alois, and he walked straight up to my car and got in it.
Excellent. Yes.
And I got in, and we went to lunch. And and left this guy on the
open mouthed.
And then it was
still waiting.
It was like a 2-hour lunch. We got back at about 3 o'clock. And it was just hilarious. And then I think old you know who, Mr. 100 got his interview, and so that was quite funny.
Brilliant. It kind of shows what Ruf's like, though, isn't it? It's all about the engineering.
It is all about the engineering.
It's not about the the showmanship of it. It's
and they're really kind of like, they prefer to actually, a bit like myself, I prefer to sort of prove something by building it and prove that it either does or doesn't work, rather than it's almost like they will build something and try and test it, and then once they've got it sort of roughly right, then they start sort of looking at using CAD to make it lighter or whatever, rather than a lot of companies these days are drawing stuff on CAD and then they make it and realize it doesn't work, and then it's sort of the other way around. But no,
they're a bit more old school, aren't they?
Very hands-on. Yeah. So and
Jonny, you're one of just want to dive in there. So you're one of very few people that's kind of got a foot in both camps in terms of Singer and Ruf.
Yeah.
So I'd like to know what your observations are on kind of dealing with both of those companies as a third party.
Yeah. Well, obviously, the first thing to say is I absolutely have to keep a wall between the two of them confidentially. Yeah. So I have to adhere to that. But they're very different animals, and the Singer side, well, it's more to do, I guess, with the way that Williams have been involved in it. So I think basically they're more sort of focused on CAD modelling and making sure that the engineering is right on the screen, and then making the parts and that sort of stuff. However, the creative side of I mean, I've been out and I saw the clay model of the DLS before that was shown to the world, if you like. That's still done in a very sort of what you see is what we're going to produce, and then it goes to carbon fiber, and and they've got some very talented people doing that sort of work out there. And the creative side of it, obviously Rob is really has got that eye for detail, hasn't he, with everything. And then the end, once they've sort of obviously kind of handed over the build to Williams, then it becomes very sort of high-techy, F1-y sort of engineering, sort of traditional CAD, or the way they do the CAD models. So they're applying the same kind of level of design process to making that car. But what I would say is I think perhaps what took them maybe by a bit of surprise. I mean, I've been there on a few occasions where they're having to do, because the parts are obviously designed on a computer against a body shell that was made by people. So a 964 shell is not exactly accurate. So when it comes to sort of fitting pieces on the inside and trim and that sort of thing, there is a fair amount of hand fettling or adjustments to the design that need to happen in order to fit it. Because remember, they're sort of they're putting the carbon fiber onto an existing shell. So whereas the Ruf is different, because the Ruf is a completely new tug.
Ground up, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So bizarrely, that's a bit. If you think about it, that's a little bit strange, because you would have thought that with Williams they would want to start again from scratch. But I guess they were driven by Singer in that they want to retain the shell and the engine number and all that sort of stuff. But obviously the engine is just off the scale amazing, you know, with Metzger's involvement and all that sort of stuff on the DLS engine. And then the Ruf side of it, well, the Ruf, again, it is a bit topsy-turvy, because traditionally Ruf have taken the production cars and modified them.
Yeah.
But the CTR is the first one where they've started from scratch. So, you know,
there's more a looky-likey than a they're taking much of the original design.
Yeah, I don't know if you sort of really had time to look at it that closely, but it's sort of incredible how they've managed to make it still look like a sort of like a 964 type thing, but it's nothing like it, because the wheelbase of a 997 for a start, so it's longer wheelbase. And because of that, they've had to do things like, you know, the doors are stretched. So the doors, I think, are sort of about 40 millimeters longer than a 911 door. And obviously, because they wanted to keep it narrow body, they didn't want to flare the arches. So they've widened the car in the top of the arches, basically.
Yeah.
But rather than take the middle, you know, usually when hot rod guys channel a car, they just take sort of 2 inches out and go like that. But this is kind of done sort of in the shoulders of the car, so it kind of still looks like a narrow body. Well, it is still a narrow body car, but it's wide, if that makes sense. So that's completely, you know, ground up the carbon fibre tub and the front and rear suspension and stuff, but retaining a lot of the Porsche, you know, sort of characteristics. I mean, it still drives like a 911. That's the incredible thing. It isn't a 911, but it still feels like one when you're in it. It's just bizarre. I mean, you know, how can they do that? It's nothing to do with the 911 really. But it still feels like one, which is quite
even down. What impressed me was even like opening the door. Obviously it's carbon bodied, but it's still got that kind of air cooled clink in the door when it closes and stuff. And just like all the little touches
so
like that.
You've driven
the CTR, you bang on. It is like, and it feels to all intents and purposes like a 911. It's mad. You know?
It's quite remarkable, really. And to be honest, I'm more excited about the SCR. Because, you know, the
naturally,
because it's sort of in my sort of fantasy mind, it sort of seems like it might be a bit more obtainable, but maybe not. I don't know, but it just sort of feels like it might be. I don't know, but So, oh, by the way, here this is the cabin controller for the Singer DLS, which is there.
Oh, cool, yeah.
And this is the one for the CTL. So
look
there
at
you
that.
go.
How cool
Right in front of you. So those projects are sort of ticking along.
Excellent. We met at the weekend at Box and Gasser, and you told me the start of a little story about staying around the Ruf's house. Was that correct?
Oh, I think it was just about Ruf. That was about Ruf coming round my house. It's just
your house.
Yeah,
that
so
was it. Yeah,
I've already done that yarn. I wish I had another one, but no, it's just that whole that whole thing was just a bizarre sort of few days, you know. But the funny thing is, you know, so I actually lived not that far from Eagle, who do the E-types. So they are literally a mile from here, and I know some of the guys that work there, and they obviously found out that I was doing these uprated electrical bits. So I ended up doing the fusing system for the Eagle E-types as well. So cool. We don't, you know, they're exclusive to Eagle. And funnily enough, we do the same with Alphaholics. We do a fuse panel exclusive for Alphaholics. But every now and again, you get these, you know, the old boys, the gentlemen's clubs getting together and doing these tours. And the guys at Eagle, who I sort of see down the pub occasionally, they'll be like, this happened one Christmas, like, oh yeah, we had that Porsche guy over. He came down. I said, oh, which Porsche guy? You know, that German one. What? What? Like a racing drive? No, he makes these. Do you mean Ruf? Oh yeah, that's him. Yeah, he was round with his mates. And I'm like, what do you mean round with his mates? And it's like they basically they get together, you know, and they go on these, you know, they go and visit. They probably had just a tour. They basically had a tour, and it was Alois and some other sort of, you know, highfalutin people in the automotive world. And and then this guy Greg says, yeah, well, they were talking about you. And I was like, what did they talk about me? And so this happened at Christmas. And like, yeah, they were talking about you about something in the engine room, and they were like stood around looking at some E-type engine and talking. I'm like, come on, they weren't talking about you. What are you on about? They said, no, they were talking about you. And then the next thing, a few weeks later, I got a call from I didn't know who he was, but a bit embarrassing really. But have you heard of Sir Michael Kadori? No, nor had I. Well, he's a really big car collector, and and he also owns the Peninsula Hotel chain. And he just rang me up, but I didn't know who he was at the time, and we just had a boys chat about. He said, "I've got a project. I've got an old taxi that I'm doing up, and I want to run it as the airport shuttle for a hotel I'm opening in London." And I'm going, okay, well, that sounds interesting. And he said, oh, it's going to be an EV. It's going to be an electric vehicle. And I was like, well, how old is this taxi? So it's from the 60s, but it's presented as if it's from the 40s kind of thing. So it's like it's like someone built it, and it was built by this ridiculous sort of CAD bloke called Gulbenkian, who was like some sort of he was around in the sort of 1800s, you know, sort of guy with a beard and a monocle who'd pop up on Poirot. And, you know, he was known for wearing, you know, sort of for wearing out cars and women, you know, that sort of thing. You can look him up, and he commissioned.
Those were the days.
Yeah. So he looks like something from a sort of old, you know, not Carry On, but some sort of old film where, you know, there's a guy with a monocle sort of staring through a peephole into a lady's chamber, you know, one of these sort of guys. So he commissioned this taxi, and then the taxi's been bought by this chap Michael Kadori. So I thought, well, that sounds fun, you know, send me the details. And the next thing I get this kind of invite to go and see this taxi, and it's been built by London Electric Cars. They're doing the conversion on it, and then it's been restored by AKVI, like a sort of Ashton Keynes vintage. They do like these really beautiful Rolls Royce restorations and stuff. But it is going to be an EV, and it's going to be the airport shuttle for this hotel on Hyde Park Corner. So
and it's going to have your air conditioning.
Yeah, and they want awesome. to have AC in it, because obviously it's going to run people to and from the hotel. And so that's sort of been really interesting. And so it's having
that kind of neatly brings us on to your EV that you've got, that you're being built at the moment.
Yeah, so that's kind of that's a good segue, isn't it? So we I bought a 914 back in, oh God, when was it? I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago now. So and I only bought it because I just thought they were cool, and I just was looking for one that was cheap, and I found it on a US website, but it was a electric vehicle website, which I thought, that's a bit odd. I thought at the time I was thinking, well, I'll just buy it as if it's a roller, you know, and I'm not interested in the battery and the motor. I'm not interested in that. So I'll just buy it. I'll source an engine. I'll rebuild the engine, get it back on the road. And because I've got a mate out in California, he went to see it, and he said, he said it looked absolutely horrible. It's had like they used to call it the Mako paint job, isn't it? Where you could drive in at lunchtime and they'd spray the car and you drive out, sort of thing. He said it's got a Mako paint job on it, but it's got less rust on it than like a 5-year-old Honda. So you've just got to buy it because it doesn't matter what it's like. And I said, well, hang on a minute. Let's see how much he wants for it. So I spoke to this guy, Gary, and on the phone, and I said, well, look, I'm not really interested in batteries and motor, but what would you take for just the car? And he said, well, I don't know, maybe how about $1,500? I'm like, what? $1,500? I was like, okay, all right, well, okay. Like, what's that game? What's that game show where they go, okay, well, that's safe. We'll park that. So I just did the deal there. I said, okay, fine. I'm happy with that. And then, of course, what I did was I went down a rabbit hole of asking him about the EV bits and the batteries and the motor and all this stuff. And of course, I got a bit sucked in, didn't I, to sort of like thinking, well, maybe I could do it up as So I went back to him and I said, well, look, I realised that it's a bit of a pain for you because you'd have to take all that stuff out. So do you just want to do a deal on the whole car? And he said, yeah, fine. So we did a deal on the whole car for not much more. And when it came over here, I picked it up at the docks and then I brought it back here. And I realised that it was basically a sort of effectively a tinderbox on wheels is probably the best way of describing it, because the guy must have lived under a pine tree, because basically the entire engine bay, which remember was full of batteries, so you've got basically there was 150 volts and potentially 1,000 amps with a sprinkling of ultra dry, dusty pine needles all over it. And I was just like, took a look at it, and I thought, do you know what? This is just a fireball waiting to happen. And this guy commuted in this thing to work for like 10 years. He'd been built it 10 years ago.
So it's all a bit old school.
Yeah,
tech.
so it's all old school. So I pulled it out. I pulled out all the batteries and I pulled out the motor and basically disassembled it and stripped it all back, still with the idea of just having it as a petrol car. And at that point, I advertised the batteries, and to my amazement, I managed to raise about $5,000 selling the batteries and the motor and all that stuff. But in the process, I met Matthew Critter, who's a guy who does London Electric Cars, and he's the one doing the taxi. So it's a funny loop around story that. So I sold all the kit, and then I started just getting the bug really for looking at EV West, who are doing all the conversions out in California.
They do some amazing stuff, don't
they? They do, yeah.
Have you seen that they've just done a speed? What would you call it? High speed car.
Oh, the Bonneville Saltflats one.
That's it, yes. Yeah. I think they've done over 250 miles an hour or something.
Yeah, they smashed some record, didn't they, out there? So, so I started looking at that stuff, and I thought, do you know what? If I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it properly, or I'm not going to do it at all. So I didn't want to mess about with the old tech stuff. So, I started looking at how people are putting the Tesla drives in the cars and all that stuff. And running all in parallel to this thread is I'd met Richard Morgan, or Moggy, who's running electric classic cars out in Wales. And his business has basically sort of escalated. So right back at the beginning of when he was still kind of a guy in a quite a small shed, he took my car away on the basis that we'd sort of do it as and when he could fit it in. But of course, it went on for like a year and nothing had happened. And I sort of had a bit of a come to Jesus with him and said, look, I want to get the car done. I don't want it just to fester.
Yeah.
And he said, well, there's a lot of things going on at the moment. I'll have to speak to you in a few months. And then he sort of popped up again, and suddenly he's got, 12,000 square foot premises and 8 guys working for him. And, I'll let you should interview him. You should tell him the story. But basically overnight his business has gone big, and and he's got this TV show sorted out, and he's like, oh, and they want the 914 on the telly show. So I'm like, okay,
that means it might get done then.
That's the first thing I said to him. That's the very first thing I said to him. I'm like, great, excellent, it's going to get done. So it's the situation, unfortunately, because of the lockdown business, was that we lost 3 months. So now it's at the stage where it's been painted, it's had the electrification's all been done, and it's sort of it drives, but it hasn't finished in terms of it hasn't got an interior and all that stuff. So it's coming back to us to have, if you like, they've done the core of the electrification, but we're doing the bits that make it kind of a classic retrofit thing. So it's going to have the AC on it. I've got loads of sort of slightly potty ideas about make it. I won't reveal too much, but what you know how fruit machines have an attract mode.
Yeah.
Well, I thought it'd be really quite funny to have a car that's at a car show that does stuff kind of when you're least expecting it to. So you might find that, you might get a few surprises when you see it at a show, that because I'm just thinking you've got all that energy there sat in the battery. The thing's completely silent. So there's nothing to stop you using that energy to do stupid things.
To do stuff.
I've got some ideas based on that. So it's, I think next year all will be revealed. But yeah, it's just a bit.
Good, yeah,
just
I look forward to that then.
So,
Cool. So what's the idea of that project? Is it going to be to be a advertisement for the company, or did it start off as just like I want a 914 and then it's developed from there?
Yeah, it kind of started off as I want a 914 because basically you don't see them in the UK very much, and they're really interesting sort of part of the sort of history of VW and Porsche, obviously. And I just always felt that the car was. It looks like it's from space, that car. Even today, it just looks like it's bonkers, isn't it? I mean, and one of the first ideas I had about it was, it's a sort of car that if you were a stormtrooper working at the Death Star, you would definitely drive a 914 to work. That's to me, that's what it looks like, and it's just there's just something about it that just looks a bit bonkers. So I thought, well, it deserves something more than a, what do they have, a 2-litre sort of VW engine? So this is going to have the Tesla small motor, which is 300 horsepower. Direct drives. There's no gearbox, just a squirt and go. And then I want to sort of I just want to sort of make it as well, because it's a really simple car. If you look in an early 914, it's like, hang on a minute, there's nothing in here. It just looks so plain. So I want to sort of take that to the extreme, really. I want to just make it so that people they look in the car and they go, where is everything? I just want it to look like 2 seats and a steering wheel. Sweet. So have some other bits on, so I'm looking at head-up display and all sorts of pop-up stuff that goes away when it's not in use. Cameras for mirrors, that all those sort of things, just really trick it out and make it all a bit crazy. But also in a funny sort of way, taking on board. If you're looking at, when I was at Frank's on Sunday, I was taking a lot of pictures of 356 Speedster interiors, because if you look at those, they're so simple. So it's all retro future Speedster, just a bit of a sort of weird melting pot of stuff. And I think the 914 is perfect for just doing something completely bonkers, really.
Absolutely.
So and of course now as well, the second aspect of it is that I see us definitely being a second tier supplier for all the EV conversions. For HVAC heating and AC, because again, when crazies come out of California, they don't often apply. They don't translate across to Europe. I mean, you can drive like a 12-window bus down the highway in LA without any windows in it. It's all the time. Yeah. It's like, for us, it's like, you get the Rosses behind you, just like, you can't drive that like that. You've got to have some windows in there. They don't have to worry about stupid stuff like defrosting. That's just not in there. They don't have to have windscreen wipers. They don't need any of that stuff. But for us, that's all the things that totally wreck driving an old car. How many times have you got in your old car and thought, that's really shitty with all the windows misted up. I mean, this is crap. I shouldn't have to drive along with the windows open 2 inches in the rain. I shouldn't have to do that. I should be able to drive it. The windscreen wipers should work properly, but they don't. So there's all these things that kind of have been forgotten by the EV conversion market because they're doing them mainly in California.
Got you. Yeah.
So when they start doing it in the UK, people like Richard have started to realise, well, hang on a minute, we can't just buy the motor kit from EV. We've got to do boring things like heating, because otherwise you can't drive it. Yeah. So again, there's a sort of niche there because a lot of people, it hasn't been addressed by the Californians because they don't need it, and there's a gap. So I'm working a whole bunch of stuff, working on 964 EV. So that's going to be, again, we're doing the whole heating and air conditioning for that. So it sort of it's leading into that. So the 914 will sort of be like a mobile sort of showcase for that stuff as well. So that's basically where it's going.
So my last question was kind of where's Classic Retrofit going? But I think you've kind of answered that. Exactly
a little bit. I mean, the thing about what I like doing is I like doing stuff that people don't notice. It's interesting actually, because I noticed that all the photos from Frank's event over the weekend, it's like my car doesn't really get photoed very much, and I'm quite. On one hand, I get a bit miffed by that because it's like,
I'll take you back I'll take you back to Luft GB.
Yeah.
And your car just shone for me that day. There wasn't many that were, but I guess it may be because it was pissing with rain, and that's so golden, your car, isn't it?
Yeah, but in a funny sort of way, that's what I was setting out to achieve, because a lot of people, I mean, I bet you didn't notice that my car hasn't got any oil lines on it, did you?
Hasn't got any
oil lines down the side.
Yes, I did actually. Yeah.
Right, so it doesn't have. Well, how have I done that then?
Just
it's an SC. It doesn't have a front mounted oil cooler anymore, because basically what I've done is I've put the oil cooler in the back. So I don't have any oil lines down the side. I don't have a front oil cooler. I don't have any of those shonky pipes that go all around the engine. Yeah, they're just all basically done in air equip, and they're all up in the back. And it's things like that I sort of, I suppose what I like doing is stuff that people don't really notice, and still until they start to notice it. No one's ever noticed that my car's got a Mark 1 Golf GTI door handles on the inside. No one's ever noticed that, because they look like they should be there. And, I've had millions of people in my car open the door, shut the door, open the door, shut the door, and they never notice it. But it's things like that. No one ever notices that the back of my seat is fully upholstered, but it's not a fold-down seat. It's just a panel that looks like it is. So it's kind of like, I came up with this idea of stock rod. It's like, it looks stock, but it's a hot rod. Sort of.
Yeah. Well, it's that OEM plus thing, isn't it?
Yeah, you have to sort of look a bit closely. So I got a bunch of stuff basically in my mind about, things like the hidden oil coolers and, little improvements that are just a bit trick, but they're not sort of in your face. They're kind of the opposite of that. We got those sort of things. We got, I'll say it, but I'll regret saying it because I'll get asked about it. Every time I mention it, I'll get asked about it like every day, forever. But we are trying to solve this problem of having electric heating. And at the moment, I'm running a set of RSR headers on my car, which haven't got heat exchangers. So up inside, I've got basically I've got a feed off of this oil cooler that's at the back to provide heating, and it'll probably be boosted with a bit of electric heat as well. So you kind of you're scavenging heat off the oil cooler and then boosting it a bit further, because sadly you can't quite get the power to do heat completely electrically. There just isn't enough juice to do it. So we struggled with it on the DLS, and that's got some crazy alternator on it, like 300 amps or something, and it's still quite an ask to do it. So so I mean, one of the things I need to, on a sort of more boring level, away from engineering, is work out how I make the company bigger, because as I said at the beginning, I don't really like the idea of managing a load of people. I'd rather just be, playing and doing engineering. So at some point, I'm going to have to consider how I kind of, move the day-to-day running to some other people, I think, because but part of the problem that's wrapped up in that is I like talking to people, as you probably tell. And, I really enjoy interacting with people. So I'm my own worst enemy. If someone rings me up in the day, I'll sort of, I'll put the phone down. And I'm like, Jesus, I've spent like nearly an hour on the phone with that guy just talking about his hot rod build. I don't even know him. He's in Oklahoma or something. I was speaking to a guy today. This guy in Oklahoma about a Mustang, a wide-bodied Mustang that was built for the SEMA show in 2013. It's like some show-winning car. It's called the what's it called? The Producer, the Producer, I think it's called. Look it up. It's crazy. It's like a Mustang that they've widened, and it was built as a show car. It's got like 750 horsepower and all this stuff, and it won all these awards. And this guy's bought it, right? It went to auction. It's like almost like I think it was like 250 grand or something he paid for it. But he didn't notice it doesn't have any heating or vents. It doesn't even have any air vents in it. And the engine is practically in the cockpit. It's like a 700. Can you imagine that, sitting in a Mustang with a 700 horsepower engine just like inches away from you, and you can't. You can't. There's no fan. You can't even get any air from outside, let alone any AC. So they phoned me up like, "How do we get AC in the car?" So I get calls like that. I've been speaking to a guy in Texas today. So the afternoon can kind of run away,
disappear very quickly.
Absolutely. Jonny, I'm surprised you've not had like Porsche Classic sniffing around, because if the product is lighter, more efficient, more reliable, I mean that's very on point for what Porsche Classic are trying.
So here's the thing. I mean, maybe if there's anyone listening, they can sort of help me out here, because I've got, so in the US they do the Carrera Cup racing, and obviously the Carrera Cup cars kind of get passed down, don't they? So people who are sort of, have a more limited budget are buying the older cars. And so there's generations of Carrera Cup cars. And of course, none of them were built with air conditioning. So it's actually not that hard to retrofit our air conditioning, our electric system, into a Carrera Cup. But part of the problem with doing that on the new one, of course, is it would have to be sort of approved or homologated or whatever. But on the older ones, then, certainly in the US, it's a proposition. So we do have a guy that's running a system. He's installed that he's in Charlotte in North Carolina, in a older Carrera Cup car. But the race car market is basically wide open in the States for air conditioning, because they absolutely need it. And they are literally running around with these boxes of ice on the. Have you seen it? It's like,
yeah, I have. Yeah,
it's like the cooler you take to the beach, and it's full of actual ice, and there's a fan on one side, some holes, and there's some tubes on the other side, and the tubes are kind of like flailing about in the car, and the guy sticks it in his race suit, or he sticks it in a. They've got these helmets that've got like kind of. I guess it's like an air hockey table. It's got sort of like little pinholes, and they stick it into the side, and it blows, keep them cool. But so yeah, I've got a product which I'm calling Ice Cube, which is a sort of miniature AC system that's designed for a race car. So it's actually designed specifically to sort of disrupt that box of ice market. Yeah. So the idea is you can get rid of that because you've got basically a load of water sloshing around within 20 minutes and it doesn't do anything. And you can just run this unit in the same position. It's actually probably a bit smaller than that box.
That's almost going back to the air conditioning on a bit of plywood, isn't it?
It is almost going. Yeah, I hadn't thought of it like that. But yeah, it's more. I think it's more sort of air conditioning in a suitcase almost. So that's that sort of concept. Yeah, but going back to the Porsche thing, I think there's been some situations where I've had a little taste of I've had sort of proper big companies sniff around that race car thing, it's kind of I think it's probably imminent. I don't know. So if anyone's listening, I mean, give me a call. But it's it could happen. But I was quite interested the other day because have you watched the T50 Gordon Murray with the T50? Yeah. So when he was talking about that, he's it was quite funny actually because he's going on about obviously everyone's comparing it to the F1 and he's going on about the thing about this car is we've got comforts, so we've got air conditioning that actually works. And he admitted on film that the F1 air conditioning didn't work.
It was shit.
And
he did, didn't he? Yeah.
And then he talks about how he's done it, and he's saying he's got an electric pump and all that stuff. And I'm thinking, it's kind of a bit behind the curve there, Gordon. I was doing that a few years ago, So, so he's got this big generator. It's quite interesting. If you look at the engine, it's got a starter generator on it. So on the crank,
it's a beast.
There's a unit that's a starter and a generator, and it runs at 48 volts, which allows you to run the pump with lower current because it's higher voltage. So there are some projects of a similar vein that I have had meetings about, which are sort of similar to that project, but I obviously can't really mention any names. But a lot of them got a bit disrupted, because of this year, and certainly one of them got put on hold because of pandemic and stuff. But I think it's almost like we all need to just forget about this year. Do you know what I mean? Start again next year. So I'm sure things. The thing about me is I don't wait for that stuff to happen. I'll just keep plugging away and keep coming up with stuff, and people want to buy it, they want to buy it. So.
It's been really awesome to get an insight into how you've gone about your business and grown super organically as well. Like, it's really cool to
I mean, we literally haven't borrowed any money. We've used guys. I've used guys that I've known for years who just love, they just like what they do, and they're all really competent in their own fields. So that's where it really works, So it's just continuing in that form until it doesn't work anymore. But it works fine. It works fine at the moment. So so it's really, really good.
Awesome. Excellent.
Should we do 10 questions?
Oh yeah, 10 questions. Yeah, have you got 10 questions? I'll get 10 questions. Awesome. Do you want to go for it, Lee?
No, you go.
No, go on. You go for it.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
Lee's good at asking the questions.
So Jonny from Classic Retrofit, they're one word answers if you can, and quick answers as well. You can't think about it.
Yeah.
The 10 questions are: the first one, air or water?
Oh, air conditioned.
Yeah, very good. Favorite Porsche model?
911.
Favorite Porsche colour?
Delphi green. That's what my car is.
Because I did ask that question earlier, but we never got to the answer. So it was nice to actually wrap that one up.
It's a 914 colour, actually.
It is, there's one for sale at the moment that I might go and have a look at.
But weird thing, sorry to interrupt. Awesome. Weird thing about that colour, it's got two names. It's either Delphi green or Saturn yellow. Because they couldn't decide whether it was yellow or green, which is when you look at it, you can sort of tell. But anyway,
that is an awesome pub quiz fact.
Yeah.
I like that. Question 4: ultimate Porsche icon. This is a person.
I think, having met him, it's Alois Ruf.
Solid.
Good choice.
Yeah, great choice. Favorite track?
Well, anything disco, really.
I like it. Yes, that's the best answer yet. It's the best answer yet.
Brilliant.
Question 6: to Fuchs or not to Fuchs?
Yeah, definitely to Fuchs. Yeah.
Stock or hot rod?
Stock rod.
That's easy. Stock rod,
combined. These are the most eclectic answers. Narrow or wide body?
Narrow all the time.
Cars and coffee or track day?
Cars and coffee.
Okay. And lastly, back seats in a 911, yes or no?
Yes, but obviously really thin ones that look like they're back seats but actually aren't.
Yes. Well done.
Yeah. Awesome. Absolutely awesome. I love those answers. They were good. Brilliant. Yeah. Very creative.
All right.
Thank you very much for joining us tonight. It's been wicked to hear the story of Classic Retrofit and your own story.
Yeah, the only thing I slightly regret is the name. It is quite difficult for quite a lot of people. All right, well, thanks, guys. Yeah, that's really good. And
awesome.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks for having me. Cheers.
Nice one, Jonny.
Cool.
All the best. Take care.
See you later. Cheers. Thanks.